Shortly before 3 p.m., 6-year-old Fay Marie hopped off the school bus from Springdale Elementary School. She greeted her mother, Selena, and they walked the short distance home, chatting about their days. Fay was known for her bright, funny, and energetic personality. Her mother affectionately called her her magical little fairy, who always wanted to play and have fun. Selena described her daughter as loving everyone and everything, always wishing for others to share in her happiness. Selena said her daughter was always the first one to give a compliment, even randomly to people she's never met before. We couldn't go anywhere without her stopping 3 or 4 different people to compliment them, be it their hair or if a color looked good on them, and she always wanted to make new friends. When they got home, Fay had a small snack before she went out to play in the yard, something she did a lot, with neighbors confirming they often saw her. Selena was regularly checking outside and keeping an eye out, and nothing seemed out of the ordinary. A neighbor reported to having seen Fay running towards a shared fence with Napa Auto Parts sometime between 3:30 and 4 p.m. At around 3:45 p.m., Selena checked outside again. Her daughter Fay was gone. After running around to all the neighbors, making several calls and searching the area, she phoned 911 at 5 p.m. Minutes later, the police arrived at the house, and by 5:30, 50 responders would be on scene. Everything was moving at a rapid pace, and at 6 p.m., the Federal Bureau of Investigation got involved as well as the community springing into action. Everyone wanted to help, but police urged citizen volunteers to stand down and let the professionals handle the search. Chad Swetlick, Fay's father, was soon informed that she was missing, and FBI agents would soon be at his house to search it. But Fay wasn't there, and phone records would later confirm that Chad was at home at the time his daughter had gone missing. Officers had already started going door to door and asked neighbors with security cameras to contact them and turn in any footage. The FBI provided a helicopter, and K-9 officers were deployed as well. Despite all of this, Department of Public Safety's Chief Byron Snellgrove said at the time, there did not appear to be enough evidence to point to this being an abduction, and Fay's disappearance didn't meet the criteria for an Amber Alert. At 7 a.m. the next morning, a hotline was set up, and almost 300 tips would come in. Police would follow up on every lead, but nothing came back. More than 250 officers and investigators from agencies across the country had now joined in the hunt for Fay. Roadblocks were set up around the Churchill Heights area, and every car coming in and out was searched. It had now been almost 24 hours since Selena had made the 911 call. A press conference was held to share some more details. Authorities still didn't know if Fay had simply walked away from her home and become lost or maybe injured, or if she'd been abducted. But by now, it was seeming less and less likely that the 6-year-old had gone off of her own accord. Investigators released footage from the local school bus to show everyone what Fay was wearing that afternoon, hoping to generate some more leads. She was wearing polka dot rain boots and a black t-shirt with the word peace on it. During their intensive search, authorities interviewed a number of people, including Selena, her live-in boyfriend Carter, and Fay's father Chad. At this point in time, police said they weren't ruling anyone out, and one of the detectives said there were no clear suspects. But members of Fay's family would soon be cleared after searches of homes, analysis of phone records, and alibis ruled everyone out. On February 12th, police released an image of 2 cars seen leaving the area Fay lived in around the time she was last seen. But the drivers of the cars were quickly located and ruled out as well, and the police were back at square one. There was still no sign of Fay and no clues pointing to where she might be. The morning of Thursday, February 13th, was the scheduled day for the bins to be collected and emptied. Officers quickly needed to do one last search before any evidence in anyone's bin was taken away. While they were searching through the bins at the homes around Piccadilly Square, they found something, a number 602, and clearly just in time. They described the evidence as critical but didn't immediately reveal what it was. Whatever they had found, it led them back to the woods. After quickly pulling together and remapping the route and area they needed to focus on, less than half an hour later, the search for Fay Swetlick would come to a devastating end. Byron Snellgrove was looking through the wooded area once more when he found her body in a shallow grave less than 200 feet from her home. It would later be determined that she had died of asphyxiation just hours after she had been abducted, and her body had been moved. A mere matter of minutes after Fay was found, officers were alerted to something else back at Piccadilly Square. A man had been found bleeding and dead on his back porch. He was not identified, and police initially kept quiet about whether or not there was a link between the two. Following the discovery of Fay's body, tributes came pouring in, and the sense of loss was felt by many. The man that had been found on his porch would soon be revealed to be 30-year-old Cody Scott Taylor. But who was he, and what link, if any, did he have to Fay? Those who knew Cody said he was a loner who constantly had a negative outlook on life. They claimed that Cody had described himself as someone that lived without hope, was asexual, and an incel. He lived with the roommates who he worked with, and his roommates said that Cody had expressed feelings of depression as well as suicidal thoughts, and he mostly kept to himself. Cody had enrolled at the University of South Carolina at Columbia and studied mathematics, but there is no record of him graduating, and according to some sources, he dropped out in 2009. Aside from a few traffic violations, he had no history with the police. He had moved between jobs a lot, but was working at a wing stop alongside his roommate at the time. As soon as they found Cody's body, police began to piece everything together and connected the dots over the coming hours, days. Although he seemingly had no link to Fay in any way, the evidence the police described as critical was found in the bin that belonged to his home. Investigators believe that Cody took Fay from her yard, but it remains unconfirmed how he abducted her and whether he used any kind of force or lured her away. It is believed that he asphyxiated her in a matter of hours after abducting her and somehow managed to conceal her body in his apartment for 2 days without investigators finding her when they searched the place twice. On February 12th, while searching the area, police had actually knocked on the door of Cody and his roommate. Cody wasn't home, so officers spoke to his roommate and took a look around. A full laundry bag was in the house, one which his roommate identified as Cody's, and detectives took a DNA sample from it. They also noted the Fay's missing persons poster was lying on a table. After they were done with the search of the property, Coates' roommate, alibi, had checked out. The investigators left. When Coates returned from work that day, his roommate recalled acting in a strange and erratic way. His roommate would also soon realize that since Fay had been missing, the apartment had started to develop a strong and odd smell. He said he initially dismissed the odor as being cheap air freshener that Cody was using to try and conceal the smell of weed, but his roommate did note that Cody never actually used air freshener, and this in itself seemed strange. Later that day, just before 6 p.m., police returned to search the pair's apartment again, this time hoping to get an interview with Cody, which they did. When he was asked about his whereabouts, he was unable to give them a strong enough alibi. He said he was sleeping at home, alone. Officers left again, finding nothing out of place. But they would soon realize that same day, a surveillance camera was collecting footage which would become invaluable. The footage showed officers going through the wooded area in their search for Fay. At around 1 a.m. on what was now February 13th, the same camera picked up something else. It captured a light coming from a spot in the same area of woods. Someone was moving around in the dark and using something to light up the area. Someone police would later confirm was Cody Taylor. 6 hours later, just before 7 a.m., cameras picked up Cody walking through the streets and going to a Walmart on Augusta Road. He wandered around the garden department for about 20 minutes, telling an employee he was working on his garden but didn't know what to buy. According to sources, Cody's roommate was emphatic that Cody had no interest in gardening. He also told investigators that Cody rarely had discretionary money but had just gotten some money from his workplace in the hours before the trip. The employee at Walmart would later tell police Cody grabbed random seeds from a display and appeared to have no plan for his garden. Around 10 minutes later, he paid for several bags of soil and fertilizer, plus a box of Pop-Tarts, and left. Cody then booked a ride through the app Lyft. According to the driver, Cody made him feel very uncomfortable. And when the driver casually asked if he was doing some gardening, he dodged the conversation. While driving, they went past some police and other media who were out looking for Fay. The driver asked him if he knew her, and Cody replied, "I don't know her. I never met her before." About 40 minutes later, at 7:47 a.m., the camera that had picked up Cody moving around in the woods in the dark also captured more in the same spot. Police determined that Cody was carrying one of the bags of soil he had just purchased up into the woods where he would bury Fay. He stays for about a minute before heading back down the hill without the bag. When the police searched the bins of Coates' home, they had found a child's polka-dot rain boot and a ladle covered in dirt. Following this huge find, they headed to the woods to conduct another search. CCTV footage showed the moment that KC Public Safety Director Byron Snellgrove discovered Fay's partially buried body next to her other tiny polka-dot boot. A white plastic trash bag was wrapped around her neck. Cody Taylor then stood on his back porch and slit his throat with a knife. As well as the CCTV and the evidence found in Cody's bin, they would soon gather more. When Fay's body was examined, she was found to have Cody's DNA under her fingernails. Her DNA was also found on the ladle along with Cody's, and both sets of DNA were found in the black laundry bag. All endings, evidence, and facts point to the exact same conclusion. Cody Taylor abducted and murdered Fay Marie Swetlick and was the sole perpetrator of this horrible case, said Byron Snellgrove. They also believed that Cody acted alone. It was announced that Fay's funeral expenses would be covered by a funeral home, and on February 21st, a public memorial was held for her. Hundreds of people, including first responders and officers, turned out to pay their respects, with many wearing pink and purple, Fay's favorite colors. In Selena's words, the sparklier, the better. Fay loved getting letters and writing notes, so journals were set up and her family wanted everyone to write a few words or draw a picture in colorful pens. It would take a year for the authorities to officially close the case. It's impossible to know exactly what happened that afternoon and why it did. Police confirmed that all the evidence pointed one way, but sadly, there are still so many more questions that can never be answered. No motive has ever been determined for the crime and likely never will be. Cody left no suicide notes or any other information in his home indicating why he had done this. Multiple agencies have tried to access the data from Cody's phone, but have not succeeded, and no evidence was found on his computer. While KC police concluded their part, the FBI investigation is still ongoing, as is a review by the State Law Enforcement Division. In July 2021, the director of KC Department of Public Safety, Byron Snellgrove, who played such a vital role in Fay's case, announced his retirement after more than 35 years in law enforcement. For me, after 65 hours of searching, the memory of finding the small body of Fay Marie Swetlick in a shallow grave on the morning of February 13, 2020, will never ever leave me. This tragic case has taken a toll on officers who were dedicated to finding her. Nearly 1 year later, they haven't forgotten the disappearance and murder of Fay Marie Swetlick immediately became, and always will remain, incredibly personal for each of us. Fay's death evidently had a profound impact on the community in which she lived, one that will continue to be felt for a long time to come. Springdale Elementary School unveiled a buddy bench that had been dedicated in memory of Fay. In Selena's eulogy for her daughter, she asked that people continue to honor Fay's memory through love, something she said was the most important magic. She asked that they try and be a little more like Fay, to be more kind, to compliment a stranger, to dance in the rain, to stop and smell the flowers, to just show a little bit more love to everyone you meet. Before we proceed, I've got an exciting surprise for you. We've launched a brand new channel dedicated to intriguing content such as old historical mysteries, cold cases, and particularly chilling horror stories perfect for bedtime. Drop a comment letting us know if you're a fan of horror stories or not. You can find the link in the description below. Let's find out who will be the first to explore it. Alright, let's dive back into the video. A 28-year-old murder victim became a symbol of a decaying, indifferent America. Her death eclipsed her life, and her name became a representation of a grim reality where people were more likely to ignore someone in distress than to intervene. Her case prompted the creation of the dedicated 911 phone line and spurred many states to implement bystander protection laws. It remains a widely studied case for psychology students globally. However, common beliefs about what happened that night may not have occurred due to rushed, overzealous reporting. The New York Times broke the story 10 days after the murder. The article was quick to point to the societal decay that led to the 38 alleged eyewitnesses turning their backs to a woman screaming for help. Although the author had access to the police report, he failed to represent the series of events accurately. Catherine Susan, also known as Kitty Genovese, was well known in her neighborhood. She drove a zippy red Fiat, and her Italian-American upbringing ensured the world heard her. She was smart, funny, and had a relaxed and fun-loving nature that drew people to her. She'd grown up in Brooklyn and was the eldest of 5 siblings. In her final year of high school, her mother had witnessed a violent crime, and the family decided to move to Connecticut. Kitty decided to stay with her grandparents within the city, despite her mother's feelings that the city was too violent. Kitty was a hard worker, often working double shifts to save money. She had dreams of opening an Italian restaurant of her own one day. Kitty was married in 1954, and while married, she was expected to live a more domestic role. This lifestyle didn't seem to suit Kitty, and the marriage was annulled less than a year later. After her divorce, she moved into an apartment independently and tried her hand at secretarial work, but it wasn't for her. She started working in bars as a barmaid and became very skilled in running the establishments. In 1961, she was arrested for bookmaking. She would take bets from patrons of the bars she worked at and place bets on their behalf on horse racing. One of the most famous images circulated of her is a mugshot. Kitty had been coming to terms with her sexuality. Only those closest to her knew that she was gay, and her roommate was, in fact, her girlfriend, though it wasn't a well-guarded secret. Same-sex relationships were illegal in New York, and it was kept under wraps. Kitty's family had no idea that Kitty was a lesbian. A little after 3 a.m. on March 13, 1964, the 28-year-old was almost home from work. She'd worked a long shift as a bar manager at Eve's 11th Hour Bar. Kitty parked her car near her building in the Kews Garden Long Island Railroad Station parking lot. A man pulled up behind her and also parked nearby. Only 100 feet from her apartment building's door, she saw that a man was following her. Kitty then sprinted for the door, but the man ran after her. The man caught up and stabbed her twice in the back. Kitty screamed for help, yelling and explicitly saying she needed help and that a man had stabbed her. A neighbor opened his window and yelled for the attacker to leave her alone, and the attacker ran off, getting into a white car and driving away. An elevator operator named Joseph Fink was sitting in the building across the street. He witnessed the entire first attack, but instead of intervening, he went to his apartment and went to bed. Meanwhile, Kitty was still able to walk, though better described as a pain stagger, off the main street and into an alleyway, attempting to reach the rear entrance of her building, but she went out of sight of many of the neighbors watching. Kitty had made her way into the vestibule of her building. She was bleeding heavily and no longer able to walk. She collapsed at the base of the staircase. Meanwhile, her attacker came back, and upon realizing no one was coming to help her, he hunted her down. He found her at the foot of the stairs, and when Kitty realized the man wasn't there to help, she screamed. This brought Carl Ross's attention, who looked on from the top of the staircase, but didn't stop the attacker. Ross witnessed Kitty being stabbed several more times. He knew Kitty personally, and yet he did nothing to help her. He did go back to his apartment and called 2 different people. The first told him not to get involved, and the second called a third, and that third person called the police. Police then arrived 2 minutes after the call, but Kitty's attacker was long gone by then. The entire attack lasted about 30 to 40 minutes. The phone chain continued and eventually got Kitty's neighbor and friend, a woman who lived across the hall. She and her husband flew out their apartment, and she was able to sit with Kitty, trying to calm her dying friend. Kitty died after paramedics arrived from the stab wounds to her lung. Police started their investigation by detaining Kitty's girlfriend. They interrogated her for over 6 hours. When they spoke to witnesses, it was concluded that Kitty had been attacked by a man, and they released her. There were allegedly 38 witness statements from Kitty's neighbors. They had all been reported as eyewitnesses by the New York Times, but only a handful had seen anything. Many had only heard the screams, looked at the window, and saw nothing. Some had told police they thought it had been a husband beating his wife. Only one witness, Joseph Fink, had seen the first attack, while Carl Ross had witnessed the second. When asked why they didn't call the police, they said they didn't want to get involved. Several other witnesses said they had called police, and the dispatcher told them that officers were on their way. Police records weren't well kept back then. It was a time in New York where violent crimes were abundant. The year Kitty was murdered, there were 636 murders. While some claimed they had called police right away, there were no logs made of those calls. From the records, it appeared that no one called the police. Today, there is no way to know who is and who isn't telling the truth, but it is more likely that police didn't arrive timely or initially placed it as a low priority until the reports came that a woman was dying. At the time, the New York Times was regarded as the most reliable news outlet in the industry. Today, we can see that the article was grossly exaggerated to paint a narrative that was and is still sensationalized to this day, even with the New York Times revealing that the article was deeply flawed in 2016, stating, "While there was no question that the attack occurred and that some neighbors ignored cries for help, the portrayal of 38 witnesses as fully aware and unresponsive was erroneous. The article grossly exaggerated the number of witnesses, and what they had perceived none saw the attack in its entirety. Only a few had glimpsed parts of it or recognized the cries for help. Many thought they heard lovers or drunks quarreling. There were 2 attacks, not 3, and afterward, 2 people did call police. A 7-year-old woman ventured out and cradled the dying woman in her arms until they arrived. Miss Genovese died on the way to the hospital. 6 days after Katie's murder, a man witnessed his neighbor's home being burglarized. Raul Cleary questioned the man who was loading his vehicle with a television. The man claimed that he worked for a moving company, and Raul called the police. The suspect was driving a white Chevrolet Vert. Police arrested the man, 29-year-old Winston Mosley. He was African American with a soft voice and small build. The officers who arrested him all agreed that he was very calm and didn't seem in the least bit concerned that he was being arrested for theft. One of the officers remembered that the suspect in Kitty Genovese's murder had also been driving a white vehicle, and the officer decided to ask him if he knew anything about that. Officers were shocked when he admitted to not only Kitty's murder, but 2 other murders. 15-year-old Barbara Kralik, who had been stabbed in her home in 1963, and 24-year-old Annie Mae Johnson, a housewife murdered in Queens 2 weeks before Kitty's murder. Detectives described him as calm, icy, and utterly unfazed by anything. His legal team described him as intelligent with an IQ of 135. Mosley said that his initial intent was to murder. He didn't seek out to rape or rob, and the murder was his primary objective. In the murder of Mrs. Johnson and Kitty, he took cash from his victims and expressed guilt only for robbing his victims. Mosley explained that he would drive in his car and search for women to follow. He would look for victims that were on their own. On the night of Kitty's murder, he had been driving around searching for a victim when he saw Kitty stopped at a red light. His confession was emotionalist, told as if he was making a grocery list. In addition to the murders, he also confessed to 40 burglaries. He said that he knew people were watching. It was only because no one came to help that he came back. Had he not confessed, he might have gotten away with it. He was only charged with the murder of Kitty Genovese, and he wasn't charged with the other 2 murders. Police already had confessions for the other murders and didn't want to things. He initially pleaded not guilty during his trial, but his lawyers convinced him to plead not guilty by reason of insanity. The jury deliberated, and after 7 hours, they came back with a guilty verdict. He was initially sentenced to death, with the judge remarking, "I don't believe in capital punishment, but when I see a monster like this, I wouldn't hesitate to pull the switch myself." In 1967, his legal team won an appeal to reduce his sentence to life in prison, and it was granted. This removed Mosley from death row. This should have been the end of his story. But in 1968, Mosley escaped while being transported from the Meyer Memorial Hospital in Buffalo, New York. He had needed to go to the hospital because he required surgery for a self-inflicted injury. He attacked the transporting officer, stole his service weapon, and fled. He broke into a vacant home and stayed in the house undetected for 3 days. He was discovered when the homeowners came to check on the property, and then were held hostage at gunpoint by Mosley. He bound his victims, gagged the husband, and assaulted the wife before stealing their car and fleeing. He went to another home and held a mother and daughter hostage for 2 hours before peacefully surrendering to the police. He had 2 more 15-year sentences tacked on to his life sentence. And this still wasn't the end of Winston Mosley making headlines. In 1971, he participated in the Attica prison riot, where 22,100 inmates took control of the prison and took 42 prison staff as hostage. The inmates demanded better living conditions, political rights, and the end of physical abuse and the warden's removal. The prison was only designated to hold 1,200 prisoners, but at the time of the riot housed 2,243 inmates. Negotiations went on for 4 days before New York State Police, along with any former police officer who wanted to participate, stormed the facility with tear gas and shotguns. 38 people were killed by the police, including 9 of the hostages. The final death toll for the incident was 49. One prison officer had been killed at the initial overthrow, and other inmates had killed some of the other inmates. Mosley became eligible for parole in 1984, which was denied. He would continue to appeal for release at every opportunity and was denied every time. At each parole hearing, he rarely expressed remorse for his actions. He'd even attempted to construct an elaborate story that an Italian mob had committed the murder and forced him to go down for it. His appeals often surrounded the theory that he wasn't responsible for the murder of Kitty Genovese, but rarely ever addressed the other crimes he had committed. Many of Mosley's family members weren't even aware of the other 2 women he had murdered, or the woman he had essayed at gunpoint while he had escaped prison. He died in prison in 2016 at 81 years old. He had served 52 years in jail. The lies told will long outlive the truth. The crime had inspired dozens of books, several films, and is cited in nearly every introductory to psychology textbook. While it was tragic, and had Josephine called police when Kitty had initially been attacked, she may have lived. The first 2 wounds hadn't been fatal. The senseless killing of Kitty Genovese is still a story told through rose-colored glasses, with her murder transcending reality. Before we continue, 90% of you haven't subscribed to our channel, so if you like this video, please subscribe. It motivates us to make more content for you. Okay, let's continue. Born in 1981, Cuban-American Albert Gonzalez grew up in Miami, Florida, with his parents and sister. At 12, he got his first computer, and by 14, he had managed to hack into NASA. He attended South Miami High School, where he was described by classmates as antisocial and quiet, though he maintained a close-knit group of friends who shared his interest in computers. Initially curious about how things worked, Gonzalez's focus shifted in 2002 when he joined an international hacking group called Shadow Crew. Shadow Crew was an early precursor to what we now know as the dark web. It was a forum-based site where illegal goods and services were exchanged and hackers worldwide collaborated. It resembled a mommy blog community for hackers, complete with how-to-OS, tutorials, discussion forums, and occasional petty drama. Members who violated the site's rules were punished by moderators through bans and the reversal of any benefits gained from the site. Gonzalez had joined Shadow Crew's early days, and he was thought to be one of the leaders because the servers were found in his possession. In 2003, Gonzalez was arrested by the U.S. Secret Service along with 19 other members. He was living in New Jersey at the time, and although he was found to be trafficking over 1,500,000 stolen credit cards and ATM cards, Gonzalez was only charged with possessing 15 fake credit and debit cards. Gonzalez avoided prison time by striking a deal with the U.S. Secret Service to help them find and identify other hackers. Part of the deal meant that Gonzalez would continue running with Shadow Crew and provide the government with whatever information he could garner from interactions with other hackers. He was paid by the U.S. Secret Service a salary of $75,000 per year for his work with the department. While providing intel to the authorities, he also headed the hacking to TJX companies in 2005, obtaining over 45 million credit and debit cards over 18 months. Authorities discovered in 2008 that the cyber criminal they were hunting down, known to them as Sedgwick, was actually their salaried informant. While Gonzalez was being detained, he eventually led officers to the $1,100,000 he had stashed at his parents' home in cash in a barrel buried in their backyard. Authorities also seized his Miami condo, a 2006 BMW, a firearm, a money counter, a Tiffany diamond engagement ring given to his fiancée, 3 Rolex watches, and various other gifts given to his family. They discovered that it had been his goal to get $15 million in cash, and then he had plans to disappear and retire. Gonzalez was charged with his connection to hacking the TJX company. Several accomplices were also arrested. Stephen Watt was sentenced to 2 years for providing help to Gonzalez. Hamza Zaman was sentenced to 4 years for laundering money for Gonzalez. The TJX company reported a loss of $171,500,000 in damages. In 2009, Gonzalez was also indicted in connection to the Heartland Payment Systems hack, where 130 million card numbers were stolen and sold. He pled guilty to the charges relating to the TGX hacks, and the other crimes he was charged with were dropped. He was sentenced to 20 years in prison for hacking and stealing information. He is scheduled for release in 2025. According to the Herjavec Group, by the year 2021, cybercrime will come at a $6 trillion expense across the globe. Cyber hacks are the fastest growing crime rate in the US, and with advances in technology and companies slow to keep up, they were getting more and more costly, sophisticated, and deadly. Cybercriminals have targeted large corporate entities, banks, hospitals, and even personal home devices. Sometimes hackers can get access for weeks or months before a breach is detected. Privacy is something that is generally taken for granted, but anything you do digitally. In this case, much of the discussion resembles local gossip. Today, we'll review the evidence, though it would be easier if the police released more information. Despite 13 years of no progress, they still consider the case active. On January 31, 2008, Lindsay Buziak had a typical Thursday at the office. The 24-year-old realtor was working for Remax Realty at their Oak Bay office. At that time, the real estate market in Victoria was thriving. On that quiet Thursday, Lindsay received a call that any junior real estate agent would find hard to turn down. The potential client called her personal cell phone requesting a quick sale. A husband and wife wanted to purchase a home before the weekend was over, and they had a budget of $1 million. Lindsay agreed to help the couple, but she had reservations about taking them on as clients. Firstly, they had called her personal cell phone, not her office phone number. Her cell phone number wasn't publicly available, and when she asked the clients how they got her number, they had said they were referred to her from previous client. The couple said that they were relocating to Victoria from Vancouver for work. Lindsay noted that they had unique accents that she couldn't quite place. When she discussed her new clients with her friends, she referred to them as the Mexicans. She noted their accent was Spanish sounding, but something sounded off about it. Despite Lindsay's initial concern about the couple, she did agree to take them on as clients. She gathered several properties for the couple to look at, and they agreed to meet the following Saturday to view a house that met their requirements. In addition to their $1 million budget, they were looking for a 3-bedroom, 3-bathroom home with a suite for a living housekeeper with the ability to purchase that weekend. Lindsay had found the perfect home in Sandage Municipality. The home was about 20 minutes from the downtown area, and the house was vacant and empty, perfect for a quick possession. She had attempted to contact the client that had apparently referred her, but she wasn't able to reach them. She couldn't shake the oddity that she had been cold called on her cell phone with such a big opportunity. Although it wasn't unheard of, $1 million quick sales weren't often seen in her office. She wasn't sure why they had reached out to her specifically. She had only sold a few properties, mostly condos, and she certainly wasn't well established in the real estate market. Her father told her that she should pass the client on to someone else, but Lindsay reassured him, saying that her boyfriend Jason would attend the showing with her. This immediately settled her father's reservations. Jason and Lindsay had been together for 2 years, and he knew that Jason was very protective of his daughter. And at 6'3", 240 pounds, he felt at ease knowing he was going to be there. The day of the showing arrived, and before the showing, Jason and Lindsay got a late lunch. Jason paid the bill at 4:24 p.m. At this point, the couple separated. Lindsay wanted to go home, get changed, and get to the property before the clients. The showing was scheduled for 5:30, and Jason still had some work to do as well, and he planned to meet her at the home. Lindsay accessed the home's real estate lockbox at 5:29 p.m. A witness watched as a couple walked into the cul-de-sac, greeted Lindsay, and the three went inside. Jason texted Lindsay saying, "I'll come meet you and I'll be 10 to 15 minutes or so." And she responded at 5:30 p.m. saying, "Okay, I'll see you in a bit. I gotta go. The Mexicans are here." At 5:38 p.m., Jason texts again just a couple minutes away, and this message goes unread. He doesn't think much of it, as he didn't expect Lindsay to open her phone while she was showing a house. He arrived at the house at 5:45 p.m., and when he pulled into the driveway, he saw the front door open and saw the prospective buyers. He had assumed the showing had just begun and opted to move his car out of the driveway and onto the side street to give Lindsay some space. Jason had a friend with him in the car. He had picked him up on the way, and the two had planned on playing hockey after the showing. The two men waited another 10 minutes before getting out of the vehicle and approaching the house. They went to the front door and found it to be locked. Jason could see Lindsay's shoes through a glass pane in the front door. Jason called 911 at 6:05 p.m. The men walked around the house and looking through windows and calling Lindsay. Jason boosted his friend over the fence into the backyard, and there they saw the patio door slightly open. Jason's friend entered the home through the patio door, walked through the house, and unlocked the door so Jason could get in. Jason sprinted upstairs, and there he found Lindsay in the master bedroom in a pool of blood. There were bloody footprints throughout the upstairs of the home. Jason attempted to perform CPR. Police arrived at 6:11 p.m. and Jason's friend was waving for help from an upstairs window. Lindsay had been waiting for help from an upstairs window. Lindsay had been waiting for help from an upstairs window. Lindsay had been waiting for help from an upstairs window. Lindsay had been waiting for help from an upstairs window. Lindsay had been attacked from behind and she had no defensive wounds on her body. Based on the evidence in the home, police were able to confidently recreate what had happened. They say that she unlocked the home at 5:29, and the witness statement and text messages confirmed that the suspects arrived and entered the home at 5:30. She had shown the entire first floor of the house and went upstairs to show the master bedroom with an ensuite bathroom. She turned her back to open the bathroom door, and police believe that was the point the couple had attacked. Her body was half in the bathroom, half in the bedroom. The attack itself had been quick and overly violent. She suffered multiple stab wounds, though the exact details of the slaying have not been released by police. When paramedics arrived, they determined that Lindsay was already deceased. Jason and his friend were immediately arrested and taken into custody as suspects, though they were released. Police discovered at 5:41, Lindsay's phone had dialed a friend that she hadn't spoken to in years, and the call left a voicemail that sounded like a pocket dial. Police suspected that that was the time of the attack. Due to the impact from her body falling, they believe she pocket dialed someone in her contact list. When Jason had arrived at 5:45 and saw what he believed was the beginning of the showing, he had likely interrupted the couple attempting to flee. Instead, the couple escaped from the rear of the home. There was no way to have seen the backyard from where Jason and his friend were waiting, and no other neighbors saw the couple escape. The attack seemed to be targeted, which baffled police. They were able to rule out sexual assault and robbery, with the entire attack only spanning less than 10 minutes. No one could figure out why someone had gone out of their way to get a young real estate agent alone and brutally murder her. Jason and his friends were released. They both had solid alibis. There was CCTV footage of Jason picking up his friend at an auto body shop at 5:30. The police instead decided to focus their efforts on identifying the couple that Lindsay had been in contact with. The couple was described as a tall Caucasian man that was well-dressed, medium build, 6 feet tall with dark hair, and the woman was in her mid-30s to 40s with short blonde hair and was wearing a distinctly patterned dress. The phone that Lindsay had been communicating with the couple was determined to have been a burner phone. It had been purchased several months prior to the murder, but only activated a few days before the first contact was made with Lindsay and registered under a fake name. The police had connected cell towers close to Vancouver, placing the phone on the mainland and traveling over to Vancouver Island 24 hours prior to the attack. The phone was only used to communicate with Lindsay, and then the phone was never used again. Due to lack of evidence found at the crime scene, the efficiency, the planning, and the careful execution of the murder, police explored the idea that the couple had been paid specifically to target and murder Lindsay. Police just had no idea as to why. There was nothing in Lindsay's life that suggested that she was caught up with anything criminal or was experiencing domestic abuse. There was just nothing. 6 weeks prior to the murder, Lindsay had gone to Calgary, Alberta, to see her father. While she was there, she expressed to her father that she wasn't happy in her relationship with Jason and was planning on leaving him. She revealed that the two had several business deals currently underway, and she wanted to wrap those up before telling Jason. She allegedly said that she didn't like how possessive and jealous Jason had become, but at no point did she express any fear of Jason. Police's best theory is that a few days after Lindsay left Calgary, there was a massive drug bust. Police arrested and charged 12 people from Calgary and 2 from BC, as well as seizing over $2,000 worth of cocaine and $200,000 in cash in a massive drug trafficking operation. It had been a year-long operation that had relied on a tip-off from someone from inside. Police believed that those with ties to the drug bust may have mistakenly identified Lindsay as an informant. Though there is no evidence to directly link Lindsay to any criminal activity, it does appear that she was friends with people who could be directly linked. The investigation is still open and police haven't been forthcoming about what may or may not have been the reason for Lindsay's murder. They have acknowledged that there may be a connection, but at this point in time, there have been no arrests. Both Jason and Lindsay had friend connections to people involved in that drug bust. And in 2006, Lindsay had mentioned to her father that she saw something she shouldn't have, but never elaborated on what she saw. On that trip to Calgary, while there, she had reached out to a friend from high school twice. It stood out because it wasn't someone she regularly kept up with, and the person also lived in Victoria. So it was odd that she was reaching out to them while she was in another province. This person ended up being a relative of one of the people arrested in that drug bust. Victoria is a smaller city, one where everyone kind of knows everyone, especially people in there at the time, early 20s. It wasn't exactly clear how close Lindsay was to those involved with the drug bust, but both she and Jason can be socially connected. And in Vancouver, police have been able to link the housing industry as a haven for money laundering for illegal activities. It might not be a stretch to broaden the scope and say that may have a similar connection to the housing market on Vancouver Island. Though they're still working to find a suspect, police have gone on the record to say that they don't believe evidence will close this case. They feel that someone in the community knows something about Lindsay's murder, and it will likely take someone coming forward with information that will lead to the closure of this case. I personally think it's odd that Jason had promised to be there for Lindsay for the showing, but was late, deciding to pick up a friend instead of being there for Lindsay when she expressed concern about meeting these people alone. But it's not a crime to be late, and it could just be a coincidence. What we do know is that Lindsay was specifically targeted and that someone close to her was involved. Someone would have had to have passed on her cell phone number and had gone to great lengths to cover their tracks. Lindsay's father continues to keep her story in the media, and in February of 2021, police announced that they would be working with the FBI and re-examining the evidence collected at the crime scene to see if any advances in technology can pull up new leads. They even said they're looking into reverse family genealogy to source a potential new suspect. On December 8, 1985, Samuel Basil and Patricia Joseph welcomed a baby girl into the world. December 8th is also the day of the Roman Catholic feast of the Immaculate Conception, so the baby was named Immaculate Mary Basil, though she was commonly known as Mackie. Mackie was one of 7 siblings, with 3 brothers and 3 sisters, and belonged to the Tlasden Nation in British Columbia, based in Tachi, south of the Kuski River. The village of Tachi, home to about 400 people, has only 1 road in and 1 road out. Patricia Joseph had attended a church-run, government-mandated residential school. Children in these schools were stripped of their cultures, traditions, and taken away from their families. The last residential school closed in Canada in 1996, and the effects of them are still being felt by many to this day. In her earliest years, Mackie's life was stable. This changed when her father had an affair with another woman and left the family. Peter, Mackie's brother, explained that following their father's departure, their mother turned to alcohol and, in his words, kind of just left us behind. Peter began to care for his younger siblings, but before long the children would be placed in foster care. The 3 youngest girls, 4-year-old Crystal, 5-year-old Mackie, and 6-year-old Ida, bounced around group homes and different foster homes with mostly non-Indigenous carers. When they were first taken into care, Mackie, Ida, and Crystal were initially kept together. Crystal talked about their experiences, saying that the foster parents would just treat us wrong, being in it for the money. If the children got wet from playing outside, then the foster parents would strip them down in public. At some point, Mackie was placed in a separate home, but they would still see each other at school. Due to her thick carrier accent and the outdated outfits the foster carers insisted on putting the children in, they were often targeted by bullies. Mackie and Ida would endure appalling physical, verbal and sexual abuse. They would bear the brunt of it to protect their younger sister, Crystal. Crystal said all that time, they were getting sexually abused by our foster parents to save me. Ida said that Mackie got the most of it. As they got older, they were placed in group homes together, staying in hotel rooms for weeks at a time when a place couldn't be found for them. They would save their allowances and use the money to buy bus tickets or would hitchhike back to the reserve to see Peter, who at that point was too old to be in the foster care system. Because we didn't get to grow up in an indigenous home, Mackie always said she wanted to go back home and get to know our family and get to know the community, Ida said. Ida would later say that their shared experience of the foster care system strengthened their bond, and they would make time to call each other regularly at 10 a.m. In the early 2000s, Mackie aged out of the foster care system and graduated from high school. She also remained faithful to her dream of reconnecting with her roots, her heritage, and her people. Mackie settled in Fort St. James and was working 2 jobs, part-time as a secretary and also as a teaching assistant. In 2006, tragedy would strike when Patricia Joseph was struck by a vehicle in Prince George. She would later die as a result of her injuries. One of the most important aspects of Mackie's life was being a mother to her little boy, Jameson. Her world revolved around him and she was a dedicated and devoted parent. Mackie adored children and became a foster parent to some on the reserve. She was determined that children who went into the foster care system would not have the same experiences that she had had, and that the children she cared for would be treated with the dignity and respect that she had been so cruelly denied. Mackie was shy and introverted and highly selective about who she chose to spend her time with. While she struggled, she rarely showed it, determined to overcome her past and not let it define her. She didn't drink or do drugs and rarely went to parties or anything of the sort. She preferred to spend her time at home. Any events that came up, Mackie would channel her creative energy and decorate the whole room. Mackie had recently split from her longtime partner, who was the father of her little boy. It is not public knowledge how long they had been together, and the cause of the breakup is also not known. What we do know is that news of their separation had come as a surprise to Mackie's family. In the week leading up to Father's Day, Mackie was with her brother Peter at his home in Tachi. Following the split with her partner, she would stay there on and off and would keep a bag of clothes in the closet. She seemed troubled, but he didn't think much of it. Whilst they were making coffee, Mackie twice said to him, "Promise me you'll take care of my baby." He responded, "Should I be worried? Are you coming back?" "I'll be back," Mackie promised. A few days later, Mackie, Peter, and Peter's wife, Vivian, went to purchase a cake for Father's Day. As Mackie had lost her ID, Peter purchased 2 bottles of vodka for a party that she would be attending later that night. Before she headed out, she grabbed her iPod and headphones. Mackie never went anywhere without her music and promised she would be back the next day as she had plans to take her nephew and son to the park. She returned a few hours later to as Peter watched her walk away, he noticed a man waiting for her further up the trail. Peter later explained in an interview with The Walrus, he had asked himself why Mackie would say goodbye in that way if she knew she would be coming home. On June 13th, 2013 at 5 p.m., she attended the funeral of her aunt. Later on, she went to the house party on the Tachi Reserve about 20 minutes away from where she lived. It is not public knowledge how many people were at the party or who exactly was there, but Vanessa Joseph, Mackie's cousin, believes that it was mostly Mackie's cousins who were attending the party. At around midnight, she was seen by her brother Peter while she was picking up alcohol and told him she was with her younger cousin Keith and a man named Victor, who was known to Vanessa. Victor was around 48 years old at the time and was known to police and had appeared in the Deaslake court for his crimes. His convictions included violent crime and at least 1 sexual assault. Unusually for her, she didn't have an extra change of clothes or makeup as she normally would for an overnight trip. She also did not own a mobile phone. It was reported that she was wearing a black hoodie with a maple leaf on the front, gray yoga bottoms, and white shoes. She also had her dark blue iPod shuffle with her and her white headphones. It is then alleged that Mackie left the party to get some red tint from a hunter's cabin near Koosh. The truck that she was traveling in allegedly got into an accident as they were coming away from the cabin on Leo Creek Forest Service Road near a place called 16 Kilometer. It has been alleged that following the accident, she had attempted to hitchhike herself, but this claim has not been substantiated nor corroborated. Vanessa would later say that an accident was apparent as parts of the truck were found near a tree that had been broken in half. She also explained that she had learned that an attempt had been made to get another truck from the hunter's cabin and used that to pull the truck that had crashed. Large portions of the timeline surrounding Mackie's last known movements have not been made public knowledge. We do know that she was alone for much of the night after midnight. From there, no one knows what happened, said Ida. It is also worth noting that around this time, Mackie was not driving a vehicle. As 10 a.m. rolled around, Mackie was due to have her daily call with her sisters Crystal and Ida, but she failed to answer the phone. Her sisters thought that maybe she was at her brother Nick's house, but there wasn't a phone at his property, and they lived too far from him to go and have a look around. Also at 10 a.m., Victor was spotted walking down a street in Tachi. Noticeably, his clothes were wet up to his chest. He was seen by Vanessa and others. Although at the time they thought it was strange, they weren't aware that Mackie hadn't been seen, so did not investigate further. After learning that the truck Victor had been driving had been involved in an accident the night before, Vanessa said she thought it was odd that Victor would be on foot in town so soon after it allegedly happened. The truck from the cabin had not been driven back to Tachi, but was instead left on Leo Creek Forest Service Road. No report of the crash was ever filed. When Mackie failed to come home, Ida and Crystal decided to call around those who knew her to see if anyone had seen or heard from her. As time continued to tick by, the next day they discovered she wasn't at her brother Nick's. Mackie had no history of running away, and this behavior was completely out of character for her. According to a report in the Walrus, Victor and Keith told Vivian that Mackie had caught a ride with somebody else. Immaculate Basil had seemingly vanished. She went missing from Highway 16. Part of that protracted highway, 724 kilometers of it, is more commonly known as the Highway of Tears Corridor. Countless women, mostly indigenous, have vanished from the Highway of Tears or been murdered near it. This was also not the first tragedy of a missing person to strike the family. Mackie's cousin Bonnie Joseph went missing from the Highway of Tears in 2007. She was last seen by her cousin Joan hitchhiking from Vanderhoof to Prince George. The numbers of missing and murdered Indigenous women in Canada is an area of confusion. A 2014 report by the Royal Canadian Mounted Police, known as Mounties, said that 1,017 Indigenous women had been murdered between 1980 and 2012, and another 164 were considered missing. However, advocacy groups, including the Native Women's Association of Canada, say that the figure is much higher. In 2014, on the question of a public inquiry into missing and murdered Indigenous women, the then Prime Minister of Canada, Stephen Harper, said, "It isn't really high on our radar, to be honest." After still no sign of her, on June 17th, a missing persons report was filed with the Mounties. The following day, they met with Crystal for the first time regarding her sister, and they began to interview people that had been at the party with Mackie to try and ascertain a timeline and start theorizing as to what could have happened to her. The community set up a search camp near the bridge where Mackie had last been seen. Around 300 people, including those from neighboring reserves, mobilized and joined the hunt to find her. The Mounties received a tip that Mackie had been sighted on the morning of June 14th, with the report saying that she had been attempting to hitchhike. The Mounties did investigate these claims, but ultimately determined that the report was false. One problem in coordinating was caused by her being a resident of one reserve and going missing on another. While they both lay within the Tlasden Nation, they are different jurisdictions. According to the Mounties report, Victor and Keith stated that they had been traveling in a white truck with Mackie after they had left the party. Keith and Victor both told the Mounties that following the accident, Mackie had separated from them, and press releases from the Mounties also indicated that she had split from the pair shortly after the truck had crashed and become stuck. As part of the investigation, both Victor and Keith were given polygraph tests. The Mounties reported to Mackie's family that both men had cooperated. Keith and Victor were also interviewed by a forensic psychologist, and in their report to the family, they noted that they had found nothing suspicious after conducting their interviews. It wasn't until after the police interviews on June 18th had been concluded that the family learned from the investigating Mounties that Mackie had left the party with Victor and Keith. Maki's relatives have stated that in the first year after her going missing, they didn't hear much from the Mounties regarding her disappearance and case. For around a week after June 18, 2013, the Mounties launched a search effort to try and find her. A hailstorm and rain on the weekend of 22nd caused problems for the search teams. Various search and rescue organizations, the Royal Canadian Mounted Police Air Services, search dogs, and the friends and family of Maki were all out looking for her. The search area was approximately 20 kilometers surrounding Tachi and Kuski. On the June 25th, it was reported by Ralph Pierre, chief of the Tlazden First Nation, that the search area would be extended, and they would also begin a search of the Tachi River. Four-wheelers and ground crews continued to search up to half a kilometer into the bush. You know the emotions are running high in the community. A lot of people are tired, but yet their adrenaline kicks in, and everybody just keeps going and going and going, Pierre said. Following Maki going missing, numerous billboards were erected to bring attention to her case. Posters were put up, and newspapers ran articles to try and generate any new leads. The official search for Immaculate Basil was called off in October. Despite this, her friends and family continued to scour the area and conduct their own searches. Rumors began to circulate about who could be responsible for Maki's disappearance. And during a search, Peter and Vivian woke up to find a hole had been slashed in their tent. Locals in town told the family that the truck she had a ride in that night had been found washed out with bleach. But the Mounties said that the police had taken possession of the vehicle and had found no such evidence to back up the claim. They also spoke to her ex-partner and said that he had had an alibi, but it was also alleged that he had ducked out of town. When being interviewed by Annie Hilton for the War Room, the RCMP said they had thoroughly investigated every lead. But as there is no crime scene, nobody can technically be considered a suspect. On October 10, 2013, Vanessa Joseph held a walk for her cousin to bring more attention to her case. Before leaving for the walk, Vanessa and others gathered in the Spirit Square with singing and drumming. Children from the Eugene Joseph Elementary School also attended and held signs bringing an awareness to violence against women and also for Maki. On the third year of Maki's disappearance, the Tlazden Nation offered a reward of $20,000 for any information that could lead to them finding Maki after her older brother Paul made the request. Despite this, there have still been no major breaks in the case. Her sister Ida said that 3 years after Maki disappeared, all she heard was rumors, despite the initial response of the police and them sending out a search and rescue team right away for her. Despite the rumor mill, Ida stated she wanted to know that the police were investigating any possible leads. She also said she was no longer hearing from the police regarding her sister's case, and that she hadn't been contacted by them since the year she went missing. There are several theories about what could have happened to Immaculate Basil. As she had a young son and was close to her family, it is considered she unlikely would have upped and left or ran away. RCMP Corporal Dave Timon spoke to the Canadian news website, My Prince George Now, about the investigation into Maki's disappearance. He noted her dedication to her little boy. It would be totally out of character for her to do something like that. Corporal Timon also stated, we would be remiss if we didn't think about foul play, so that's being considered. Was she attacked by a wild animal? Was it a part of the terrain? Did she step off a cliff? Other explanations for her disappearance have been considered, including her being involved in an accident. However, had she been involved in an accident, it would be reasonable to presume that she would have been on foot, meaning that had she died by misadventure, it would have been well within the search radius. But no trace of her was found. None of the items that Maki had with her that night, such as her clothes or iPod, have ever been found. Another theory was that she had been attacked by an animal. Animals in the area include wolves, cougars, grizzly and black bears, and coyotes. This theory is called into question when one considers that no such evidence of an attack was found by those searching on foot and from the air. No blood or remains have ever been found that are confirmed to be hers. The likelihood of it being a stranger abduction could be considered small due to the remote location of the area and the timing. However, the FBI have stated that abductions committed by a stranger most likely involve a firearm and are motivated by sexual assault. Maki's family is still looking for her and have never stopped. They regularly watch crime shows on Investigation Discovery is for the people who did it to come forward and give her back to us, Peter said. The only thing I would like to honor my sister is for the people who did it to come forward and give her back to us, Peter said. It's tearing my family apart. Right now, it feels like you're a lost soul yourself, just wandering this world. And deep down in your heart, sometimes you do get to the breaking point, where sometimes you just want to take things into your own hands and deal with it your own way, but you can't. You just gotta keep on trying to find answers. If you have any information relating to the disappearance or whereabouts of Immaculate Basil, please contact the Royal Canadian Mounted Police. On October 24, 1998, Kathy Kucka listened to a voicemail from her younger sister, Christine. In the message, Christine mentioned she would be helping Rudy clean his new apartment and promised to call Kathy later. Kathy was worried by the message, as Christine's last communication had been concerning. Christine had a tumultuous relationship with Rudy, though they had recently started getting along better. The couple had met when Christine took a chemistry course at her college, where Rudy, whose real name was Darshanan Prasad, was her professor. Rudy had claimed he was single and recently out of a relationship, leading to their casual dating once the semester ended. At the time, Christine was a full-time student, the founder of the Philosophy Club at her school, and worked full-time. Rudy taught and was working towards a degree in dentistry in New Jersey. The two saw each other when they had time, but it didn't seem to be often. She had been drawn to Rudy's shyness. His quiet, conserved nature was opposite to her. She was as liberal as they came and wasn't afraid to voice her opinions. Her Midwestern background was abandoned when she moved to New York, and she finally felt that she had found a place where she fit in. The 28-year-old was majoring in philosophy and had plans to go to law school. Christine was very smart. She had received a full scholarship for her undergraduate degree, though her plans took a bit of a turn when Christine discovered she was pregnant. Though completely unexpected and unplanned, she was overjoyed with the news. She welcomed motherhood, even if she had to go it alone. Was a furious denial. He tried to say it was impossible for him to be a father, and it must have been someone else, but when she adamantly insisted she hadn't been with anyone else, he switched direction. He went from angry to upset, and tearfully told Christine he was married. He had gotten married when he told her he went on a business trip, and it would bring a great shame upon his family if he had an illegitimate child. He went on to say he shared a house with new wife and his parents were paying for his dental school classes, and he said his parents would cut him off. Rudy was an immigrant from Guyana. He said his father was a Hindu priest and would disown him. His family were deeply religious. Following a very strict Brahmin discipline in Hinduism, their religion placed a high value on those with good and virtuous characteristics. Social class within their religion was based on emulating the values taught. An affair risked not only Rudy's standing within his church, but also the standing of his entire family. Christine was shocked when Rudy continually insisted that she terminate the pregnancy. Christine decided to terminate the relationship instead. She made it clear to Rudy that she had no intentions of ruining his life, but she was keeping the baby and she expected nothing of him. However, she did plan on naming him on the birth certificate in the following months. Christine and Rudy spoke several times about the baby. As time grew on, Rudy became more forceful about the termination. Christine began to tell friends that she felt unsafe around Rudy and feared he would do something to harm her to try and cause her to miscarriage. Friends noticed that the once strong and independent woman was increasingly jumpy and anxious. Christine wanted Rudy to sign an acknowledgement of paternity for the birth certificate. This would give her legal options for both child support and custody for the child if she needed it. After another heated argument about signing the paperwork, Christine had paged his beeper several times. When a call was finally returned, Christine had prepared to let Rudy have it, but was shocked when it was a woman on the other end. A little aside for those who didn't grow up with pagers like myself, pagers were popular before cell phones. They were a device that could only receive messages. You would typically call a pager with your phone and would type in a number that you wanted the person to call you back on. The receiving pager would beep the display number, which is why you may hear it called a beeper. The woman was Rudy's wife, and he had forgotten his pager at home, and she demanded to know who was paging his beeper so much. At first, Christine lied and said that she needed to speak to Rudy because she was one of his students, but after a while she admitted to why she needed to talk to him. The two women exchanged several more calls. Christine reassured her that she had no intention of involving herself with their marriage, but she wanted Rudy to have a part of the child's life. The women seemed to bond over Rudy being an asshole, with the two of them lamenting that Rudy had ruined both of their lives. Eventually the call stopped and didn't hear from Rudy for weeks. Then, out of nowhere, he showed up at Christine's house. Christine shared a house with 5 other roommates. He told her this long-winded story about his wife, how she had told his parents and they had kicked him out, and he was living on his cousin's couch. At this point, Christine was 5 months and was closing in on her 2nd trimester. She had confirmed a birthing center, a midwife, and seemed quite prepared for her upcoming birth. Christine told friends that she had reservations about his story, but she let him back into her life nonetheless. He began to take a keen interest in the baby, which surprised Christine, but she didn't want to rock the boat because she wanted to have a civil relationship with her baby's father. Those who saw the two said they were affectionate, but not intimate. With Christine constantly pushing Rudy to reconcile with his wife, she was clear that she didn't want to be with him romantically, but wanted him to be involved in the baby's life. Though she had been concerned about him harming her earlier in the pregnancy, since she was too far along for any more conversations about terminating, I think she felt more comfortable around him. She eventually started to spend more time with him privately, as opposed to only in public places. The night before her disappearance, Rudy had called to let her know he had gotten an apartment. He wanted to show it to her and asked if he could help him clean it. She agreed, and he said he would pick her up in the morning. Rudy arrived at noon to pick her up, but Christine had slept in, and he needed to come up to the apartment while she finished getting ready. 2 of her roommates saw Rudy, and they both described him as agitated and said that he paced the living room while Christine was getting ready. Right before Christine left the house, she left a quick message for her sister, and then she left. Kathy had been expecting a call from her sister that evening, and grew increasingly concerned as the hours ticked on. The following morning, Kathy got a call from one of Christine's roommates, who informed her that Christine hadn't come home. Kathy and her husband packed up their 2-year-old son and drove into the city straight to the 70th precinct. They wanted to immediately place a missing persons report, but police said that because she was an adult, there was no reason to believe she was missing yet. Finally, 3 days after Christine had gone off with Rudy, police finally allowed her sister to report her missing, and after 7 days they started investigating. Kathy, her husband, and several of Christine's friends dispatched immediately. Most of them had a history in political activism, and the group banded together with a military precision and began papering the neighborhood with flyers. Kathy spoke to several news outlets and put together a candlelit vigil outside Christine's college. On November 2nd, Rudy sat down with police with his lawyer, where he was said to have cooperated, but had no alibi. His story was that he took Christine to the mall, he sat in the car while she went shopping, and then he dropped her off at a health food store near her house around 4. This seemed to contradict what Christine had said about seeing an apartment. There was also no witnesses that could verify his story, and he couldn't even say what mall he took her to or what stores she went to. Without any evidence to point to foul play, police were unwilling to do anything more. The NYPD stated it wasn't illegal to be the last person someone was with, and it also wasn't illegal to knock up your girlfriend when you were married. But once again, Rudy and his family had everything to lose. Their status and social standing within their temple were of the utmost importance. The Kupka family had hired a private investigator to try and find any evidence, but nothing came up. They continued to try and keep her story in the media in hopes of drumming new leads. In 2010, when a cousin of Rudy vacated a plumbing store in Queens, the NYPD sought permission to dig up the basement floor. The new owner agreed, and although a cadaver dog indicated the presence of human remains, they found nothing. Rudy Persaud is now a dentist in Florida. He and his wife live there with their children. He has refused to address any of the accusations, both with police and media. He and his wife have maintained that they don't know what happened to Christine or his unborn child, nor do they care. Kathy has devoted her life to finding justice for Christine. She firmly believes that her sister was murdered that night, maintaining that she had everything to live, for she had numerous plans for both the immediate and distant future. She was excited for the birth of her child, for her future career, and to do it all on her own. On October 3, 2008, 33-year-old Gil Tatro was driving according to some cryptic and mysterious directions that eventually led him to a garage in Edmonton, Alberta, Canada. Having recently arrived from DC and now separated, he had been using the popular dating site Plenty of Fish in hopes of meeting someone. He had recently started conversing with a woman named Sheena, who used the profile name Spiderwebs, and they had immediately hit it off. Gil noted that Sheena seemed eager and almost insistent about making plans. Despite the odd and confusing directions, he assumed Sheena simply didn't want to give out her physical address for some reason and proceeded to drive out to pick her up for dinner and a movie. Sheena said she would leave the garage door open for him to drive into. He reached the location just after 7 p.m. He couldn't see anyone, and the garage door was only partially raised, so he parked up and entered on foot. Gil remembered feeling uneasy about everything, but shook the feelings off and carried on anyway. He stood in the dark room for a second when suddenly he felt someone grab him from behind and start prodding him with a stun gun. He turned around and came face to face with a man towering over him, wearing a hockey mask. The masked man took out a gun, pointed it at Gillis, and ordered him to get on the ground. Once he was on the floor, he forced duct tape over his eyes. Adrenaline raced through him, and Gillis said he made a decision that if he was going to die, it would not be on the masked man's terms. He ripped the tape off his eyes and grabbed the gun out of the man's hands. In this moment, he realized the gun was plastic and fake. The pair struggled for a few minutes before Gillis rolled under the garage door and made it outside. He crawled into the alley behind the garage before the masked man started grabbing his legs and tried to pull him back in. The effects of the stun gun had left his legs like jelly, and he was trying to move as quickly as he possibly could. With one last push and with everything he had, he fought his way out of the man's grasp. Outside of the alley, he saw a couple out for a walk. Gil begged them for help, but the couple were scared that this was part of a potential plan to mug them. The man chased him out and assured the couple there was nothing to worry about, and his friend was just messing around. They quickly left the scene, but the couple had clearly startled the man in the hockey mask and he retreated back towards the garage. Gillis finally made it to his truck and managed to escape. He never spoke of this incident to the police, embarrassed that he was duped by the fake profile and terrified that the man would find him and kill him. He convinced himself that it was not as serious as he'd thought, and he said no more about it. Little did anyone know the same thing was about to happen to someone else, and the outcome would be far worse. 38-year-old John Brian Altinger, known to his friends as Johnny, worked as an oilfield equipment manufacturer. Described as honest and hardworking, he was quiet. But once someone got to know him, he had a great sense of humor. He, like Gil, was also using dating sites to meet people. He had just started chatting to a lady named Jen on Plenty of Fish. After building a good connection, Johnny told his friends he was going to meet up with her in person. His brother said he was looking for love and thought he finally might have found it. He sent his friends an email telling them of his plans and also sent them the directions of the location that he and Jen would be meeting at too. Days would pass and friends would not hear a word from Johnny. Never out of touch for this long, everyone knew something was off. They all became even more concerned after they received some strange emails. In these emails, Johnny claimed that Jen had taken him on a surprise trip to Costa Rica and would be there until mid-December. His brother Gary said it was the weirdest message he had ever received. Shortly after this, Johnny's employers received an email informing them of his resignation, which came as a total shock. They emailed back but got no response from him when they requested a forwarding address to send his final paycheck to. Johnny's friends eventually broke into his condo to start their own investigation. Despite his emails saying he was traveling, to their concern, they found his passport and an empty suitcase with no indication that he had packed for a holiday. Nor had he left the apartment in a good place for someone that was leaving for 2 months. Following this, the Edmonton Police Service now agreed there was reason to be concerned and subsequently launched a homicide investigation. Fortunately for the police, they followed the directions that Johnny had sent to his friends and were unknowingly led to the same garage that Gillis had been lured into. The garage was being rented by a man named Mark Twitchell. But who was he? And why would Johnny and Jill have ended up at his garage? Mark Andrew Twitchell was born in Edmonton, Alberta, Canada in 1979. He had dreams of making big Hollywood blockbusters and studied at the Northern Alberta Institute of Technology in the Radio and Television Arts program. He had a passion for making costumes and props, which soon moved into writing and directing his own films. In 2001, he met his first wife, Megan. She said he was charming and funny, and they got on straight away. She recalled that Mark had such a fascination with films that once he found something he liked, he would become fixated on it, trying to emulate it in every way. She soon noticed that Mark was spending a lot of time online, often making bizarre and random profiles to talk to people on various sites and forums. He would have disturbing conversations with her about his desire to feel what it was like to kill someone and how he would choose the right person to murder. Already on a downward spiral, the relationship started to crumble even more when found out that Mark was being unfaithful and lying to her constantly. After just 4 years together, the pair would divorce. Mark then met his second wife, Jess, and the pair would go on to have a daughter. He bought his new family a lovely home. But little did Jess know, it had been purchased using fraudulent documents that he had used to get the mortgage. He would soon quit his job, but regularly would drive into town pretending as if he was still working while living off investors' money. He threw himself into his script writing and directing even more. And in 2007, he directed a full-length fan film prequel called Star Wars: Secrets of the Rebellion, which even included a cameo by Jeremy Bulloch, a British actor known for his role as Boba Fett in Star Wars. Mark spent a lot of time recreating costumes and making props for the film. Although it garnered a decent amount of buzz and attention online, the film would never see a release. Mark then went on to shoot an 8-minute-long horror film called House of Cards. The storyline was about a man who goes to meet a woman he met online, only to realize he had been lured there by someone using a fake profile. Once inside, the man was attacked and bound to a table, where he was murdered by a man in a hockey mask. On September 1st, 2008, he started renting a garage to film in. Mark had handed out leaflets to neighbors saying that he would be shooting a lot and if they heard any screams coming from the garage over the coming weeks, not to be alarmed. He also had a strong fixation with the TV show Dexter, a crime drama about a forensic technician, Dexter Morgan, who doubled as a vigilante serial killer. He became so he spent almost an hour talking to Detective Mike Tabla and was very keen to talk about his love of films and his latest scripts and projects. Tabla quickly got back to the questions at hand and wanted to know who had access to his makeshift studio garage. He then told Tabla he remembered seeing the padlock to the garage looked like it had been tampered with, and this could have been to the garage and the missing Johnny. Mark told Detective Tabla he had no idea who Johnny Altinger was, and he had never heard of anyone called Jen either. For the most part, detectives were satisfied that his answers seemed plausible. He appeared honest and forthcoming, and he was not deemed a suspect. The police needed to look elsewhere, and they took to the public to try and get more information about Johnny. 2 witnesses came forward reporting to have seen who they now believe to be him. It was the couple that had actually seen Gillis running away from the garage that day, not Johnny. Because of the times and dates they told police they saw this happen, authorities now knew this was no isolated incident, and there was a potential second victim out there. They thought that if they could find this mystery man, they could find Johnny too. Police received word that Johnny had a red Mazda. After his first interview with Detective Tabla, Mark sent an email over to him with some more info that might be useful. In this email, he said he had recently bought a car worth $20,000 from a complete stranger in the street for just $40. It was all too coincidental, and his story now seemed totally improbable. Mark then sent a second email to his production team requesting that they stop talking to the police. He was immediately called in for another interview. With the interview now at a standstill, Mark was free to walk out. Authorities got warrants to conduct a thorough search of the garage and Mark's home and confiscated some bits and pieces, including his laptop. The garage was small, cold, and fairly empty. A table, some cabinets, and various random props and boxes were scattered around and the windows were covered over. Police used luminol in the hopes of detecting any blood. The garage was covered and showed an extremely grisly scene had taken place. While looking through his laptop, they found some extremely disturbing documents. They discovered a dark and violent 42-page document that Mark had deleted. It was called SK Confessions, later understood to be Serial Killer Confessions. It began, "This story is based on true events. The names and events were altered slightly to protect the guilty." It spoke of his descent into becoming a serial killer and how he would lure victims using online profiles, detailing the horrific things he wanted to do to them. In the document, Mark wrote in detail about the murder of a man named Jim. Jim, police could only assume, was Johnny Altinger. He talked of stabbing him and watching him bleed out on the floor as the victim gave him a pure Hollywood reaction. I grabbed his jaw with my gloved hand and moved it while making a funny voice to make it look like it was talking, and chuckled to myself at the total silliness of it all. Part of the story read, before he detailed how he dismembered the body like a pumpkin for Halloween. Throughout the writing, he talked to finding a garage to use as a location, as well as sourcing his hockey mask, props, and knives. He referred to this garage as his kill room. Police impounded Mark's car as well, and a search found Johnny's blood inside, as well as a post-it note reminding him to clean up his kill room and then cheat on his wife. From all of this pieced together, police concluded that on the day Johnny had gone to meet with the person he thought was Jen, he had actually been met with Mark Twitchell. Mark bludgeoned him with a pipe before stabbing him to death and dismembering him. He tried and failed to burn Johnny's body and eventually put his remains in a sewer. In another document he wrote called Profile of a Psychopath, he admitted to being a pathological liar that cheated constantly and was unable to hold down jobs as he despised working for anyone but himself. Mark Twitchell was arrested on the October 31st, 2008 and was charged with first-degree murder the same day. He and his second wife, Jess, were divorced shortly after his arrest. Mark then spent the day driving around in the back of the police car with detectives pleading with him to tell them where Johnny's body was. Mark stayed silent the whole journey. Gil Tatro, who had now heard the details about Johnny's case, would walk into the police station and tell them everything that had happened to him, making the detectives' already strong case Mark even stronger. Mark's once deleted document SK Confessions describes something so similar happening to Gillis that Mark could no longer justify the writing as being just a gruesome piece of fiction. Authorities searched for Johnny's remains for nearly 2 years, with Mark refusing to tell them what he had done to him. Eventually, Mark asked to talk to the police from his cell. He silently slid a piece of paper across the table, which was a map and a series of directions. This led to a sewer. Johnny's remains were finally found just half a block away from where the search for his body had stopped. In March 2011, Mark Twitchell's trial began. He first offered to plead guilty to interfering with human remains, but the Crown rejected this and pushed on for a first-degree murder conviction. The case sparked a lot of media attention, and Mark was frequently referred to as the Dexter Killer, given his fascination with the drama. He took to the stand in his own defense and would make some baffling claims. In a shock line of defense, he confessed to killing Johnny, but claimed he had done so as an act of self-defense. He claimed he had hatched a plan after he made his short film House of Cards. The mini-movie gave him an idea to try and create a buzz around what he hoped might turn into a franchise. He said he lured Johnny and Gil to the garage, but alleged he was going to tell them it was all a big hoax in the hope they would write about it online and get people talking. He said he bought everything he needed to stage the garage as a kill room, and although bizarre, he said it was something that had got out of control in a way he didn't plan for. Mark said that Johnny had become angry, and he told the jurors that in a blind panic, he cut up Johnny's body and tried to burn it. When this failed, he cut it up some more and dumped it down a sewer. He then said he later broke into Johnny's home and wrote emails under his name to his friends and workplace before stealing his printer and laptop. And the document entitled SK Confessions? It was all just fiction and random pieces of research on serial killers, he said. After a 3-week trial and just 4 hours of deliberations, Mark Twitchell was found guilty and handled a life sentence with no chance of parole for 25 years. He then faced an attempted murder charge for luring and attacking Jill, but this charge would later be dropped as he had already secured the maximum sentence possible. Mark appealed his conviction on the basis that he felt the media was so focused on the case and the reporting was so sensationalized that it affected the jury and created a bias. He soon dropped his appeal. The TV show Dexter had also been a huge focus before, during, and after the trial, but the writer of Dexter weighed in and said, "Reading Dexter will not make you a serial killer. If you are not already capable of killing another human being in a cold, cruel, deliberate way, no book ever written will make you capable of doing so. There is no magic words that will turn you into a psychopath." In May 2013, it was reported that Mark had purchased a TV for his prison cell so he could catch up on every Dexter episode that he had missed since he was arrested. He also set up a dating page on a site for inmates. He said he had made some terrible, regrettable choices and is looking for an interesting, intelligent, open-minded, delightfully imperfect woman to relate to and share amusing observations with. After his traumatic ordeal with Mark, Gillis Tetra met with Johnny Artinger's mother. He said that she had held his hand and said she was so happy he was still here. He went on to write a book about his experience. It is unknown how far Mark Twitchell would have taken his crimes had he not been caught. He was obsessed with blurring fantasy and reality, and confused fame with infamy in the most disturbing way imaginable. Jill continues to rebuild his life and move past the traumatic events of that day in October 2008. And Johnny's family and friends continue to remember his fun, loving, and kind personality. They determined that his life will not be defined by the appalling crime committed against him. He will instead be remembered for the joy and laughter that he brought to so many people. Judy Zellner worked as the sexton at Trinity Evangelical Lutheran Church, a small church in Springfield Township, Pennsylvania. She had keys to the church to allow her to clean the building twice a week. Located in a relatively rural area of Upper Bucks County, the church's doors were always kept locked when not in use for security reasons. Therefore, Judy was alarmed when she found the door unlocked around 12:30 p.m. on January 23, 2008, as she put her key into the lock. Although the light in the church office was on, she did not see anyone at the desk through the window in the office door as she entered. Normally, no one else was at the church when Judy came to do her cleaning. She dropped off her things at the narthex and went up to the pastor's office to see if he was there. He was not. It occurred to Judy that the new church secretary, a woman named Megan she had not yet met, may have been in the building. She went back to the church office, this time going inside. When she did, she found a woman lying behind the desk, surrounded by blood, which appeared to be coming from a large wound to her head. She did not appear to be breathing. Judy feared that whoever had hurt the woman may still be inside the building, so she grabbed the church's cordless phone and ran outside to call 911. She was understandably hysterical, so she had difficulty getting the operator to understand that she had found a woman she believed had been murdered inside her church. Paramedics quickly arrived at the scene. They found that the woman inside the church office was still alive. They also noticed that her head wound appeared to have been caused by a bullet, and that they were at a crime scene which they would have to disturb in their efforts to save the woman's life. While one paramedic brought in a backboard to bring the woman out to the ambulance, the other grabbed a marker off of the desk to outline the woman's body so the police would know how they had found her. He also caught sight of a shiny piece of metal that looked like it could be a bullet fragment and placed his ball cap over it so that it would not get knocked away when he and his partner moved the woman out of the room. Judy had told the 911 operator that she believed the injured woman to be the new church secretary, a woman named Megan. She still believed this to be the case as the paramedics picked up the woman to carry her out to the ambulance. When Judy finally got a good look at the woman's face, however, she realized she was not the new secretary, but Judy's good friend, Rhonda Smith. At 42, Rhonda was nearly 2 decades younger than Judy, but the age difference did not stop the two women from becoming fast friends when Rhonda and her mother, Dorothy, joined the church 2 years earlier. They sang in the church choir together, got together outside of church a few times a month, and Judy was always available to talk to Rhonda on the phone when she was going through something difficult. Rhonda had experienced numerous hardships in her life right from its very beginning. 2 months before Rhonda was due to be born, her mother, Dorothy, had begun hemorrhaging. When the Smiths arrived at St. Luke's Hospital in Fountain Hill, Pennsylvania, they were told that their baby's umbilical cord had become wrapped around its neck, and Dorothy would need to undergo an emergency cesarean section in order to save the baby's life. Rhonda was born weighing 4.9 pounds but still had obstacles to overcome. Doctors told her parents she required surgeries on her heart and her bowel, and they would need to transfer her to St. Christopher's Hospital for Children in Philadelphia to undergo them. Dorothy was experiencing complications from her C-section, so she could not travel with her daughter. Rhonda's father, Jim, therefore rode alone with the paramedics who were transporting his newborn daughter the 50 miles to Philadelphia. He spent the ride staring at Rhonda's chest, making sure she was still breathing inside of her incubator. Jim claims he saw an angel hovering at the top of the ambulance during the trip, and the sight of it convinced him that his daughter would be all right in spite of everything. When they arrived at the hospital, further testing proved him right. Rhonda no longer had her heart murmur and her bowel problems had resolved, meaning she no longer required either of the surgeries. Jim Smith knew that his new daughter was a fighter. Jim and Dorothy would be rushing to the same hospital, again worried for their child's life. 42 years 6 days later, after a social worker from St. Luke's called to inform them that Rhonda had been seriously injured at the church and was unlikely to survive. Doctors determined that Rhonda was brain dead, and the Smith family made the painful decision to remove her from life support. Rhonda had been shot twice in the head and no gun had been found at the scene. However, authorities were not immediately sure that they were dealing with a homicide and began investigating the possibility that Rhonda had taken her own life. Rhonda would rely on the fighting spirit she displayed right after her birth throughout the rest of her life. She was a courageous child who was never frightened of new things like other children her age, and instead of getting upset when her older brothers teased her, she teased them right back. At the age of 6, Rhonda decided she wanted to be a teacher and spent years working towards that goal. She graduated from Saucon Valley High School in 1984 and spent the next 2 years working numerous jobs to save up money for her higher education. In 1986, she enrolled at Northampton Community College, becoming the first person in her family to go to college. Rhonda graduated with an associate's degree in secretarial science in 1988 and enrolled at Bloomsburg University to complete her bachelor's degree and earn her teaching certification. She continued working while going to school and made all of her student loan payments on her own without help from her family. She was set to graduate from Bloomsburg on December 15, 1991. Things started to fall apart for Rhonda just before she achieved this major goal, however. She lost her appetite and would go days without eating and would go days without sleeping due to terrible bouts of insomnia. Rhonda's behavior became more erratic and she became very paranoid, imagining people trying to break into her apartment and hidden cameras throughout the residence. She had to be hospitalized and eventually placed into isolation because she became aggressive when she believed the woman she initially shared a room with was a devil. During this first hospitalization, Rhonda was diagnosed with bipolar disorder, a condition she would struggle with for the rest of her life. Rhonda did graduate from Bloomsburg less than a month after she received her diagnosis, but only with a degree in business administration and not with the teaching certification she had been working towards for so long. She would take the final exam needed to earn her certification 3 times after her graduation, but she never passed it as her condition was not yet well managed. Rhonda at first had difficulty accepting her diagnosis but ultimately found ways to cope with it. In later letters, she would attribute the strides she made largely to her parents and their ongoing support and encouragement. The medication she took for her bipolar disorder prevented her from experiencing the severe episodes that had initially led to her diagnosis, but she did require hospitalization several times in the following years. Even as Rhonda learned how to best manage her bipolar disorder, it greatly impacted her life. Unable would eventually experience one of the severe depressive episodes associated with bipolar disorder, and she would have to leave the position. This cycle continued for many years. Despite her financial instability, Rhonda insisted on living on her own and paying her own rent, something she took great pride in. Given her mental health history and the fact that Rhonda had previously discussed ending her life, authorities were not quick to rule out the possibility that Rhonda's death was the result of suicide. They theorized that perhaps Judy Zellner, who was friends with Rhonda, had found the gun when she found Rhonda in the church and disposed of it so that no one would suspect suicide. They also considered the possibility that Rhonda's parents could have done the same thing. According to Dorothy and Jim, they had driven past the church on their way to lunch in the nearby borough of Quakertown just before Judy Zellner had arrived there. They were surprised to see their daughter's car in the parking lot as she was only supposed to work until noon. Dorothy suggested they stop in at the church to ask Rhonda to join them for lunch, but Jim said no since he assumed Rhonda was just getting a few extra hours of work. Authorities thought they perhaps had stopped in at the church and disposed of the gun for the same reason they thought Judy may have. However, video surveillance showed the couple entering and exiting the restaurant where they had lunch, showing no signs of distress. Furthermore, scenario given how much Dorothy and Jim loved their daughter. Further forensic examination would later show that Rhonda had not committed suicide. She had been murdered. Based on gunpowder stippling and the wounds Rhonda had sustained, it was determined that Rhonda had been shot from 3 to 4 feet away and that she had held up her hand in defense before the second shot was fired. Several potential suspects, like the man Rhonda had been dating a few months earlier and a man she had met in a support group and was planning to go on a date with, were investigated and eliminated in the early days of the investigation. Investigators began considering the possibility that the murder had something to do with the church rather than Rhonda. Very few people who had known Rhonda would be at the church that day. The church's pastor, Greg Shreves, had to be away for a conference for 3 days, and an important church meeting was coming up. The church had recently hired a new secretary, but she had not started yet. At the last minute, Pastor Shreves decided to ask Rhonda to fill in at the church for those 3 days and assemble some of the packets and files needed for the meeting. He knew it would help her out financially and believed it would bolster her self-esteem. A strange visitor had attended a recent Sunday service. During communion, he attempted to steal the cup the wine was distributed in. When parishioners came up to him to greet him after the service, he told each of them that he was from different states. He also remarked how easy it would be to rob the church. While nothing had been stolen from the church, authorities still followed up on this man. Despite their best efforts, they could not identify him. Having no luck with the lead about the outsider, investigators pressed Pastor Shreves to try to identify anyone within his congregation he believed they should look into. The pastor could not believe that any member of his church could commit such a crime. Eventually, he did provide them with the name of a church member who had been causing problems at the church, Mary Jane Fonda. Mary Jane Fonda had been born in Philadelphia, but her family loved taking road trips up to the more rural areas of Bucks County. When Mary Jane was 12, her parents purchased a small cabin on a large plot of land in Springfield Township, and the family regularly spent their weekends there. While Mary Jane preferred Springfield Township to the busier and more stressful Philadelphia, she would not move out of the city and to her parents' property for more than 30 years. In 1987, she moved in with her parents, who were by then retired and living in Bucks County full-time, to help take care of them as their health began to fail. Mary Jane's mother passed of them as their health began to fail. Mary Jane's mother passed away in September of 1992, and the following year, Mary Jane would find herself in the middle of a case that still remains unsolved: the disappearance of her father, Ed Fonda III. Ed struggled with the death of his wife. He took out the pain he was feeling on Mary Jane, who was still working as his caretaker, and the two started arguing regularly. Mary Jane says that around this time, her father began leaving the house again to walk around his property, sometimes walking up the back steps without his cane, something he had previously lost the ability to do because of his 2 hip replacement surgeries. According to Mary Jane, he would sometimes walk too far away from the house for her liking, and she would have to call him back, but her father's walks were otherwise uneventful. According to Mary Jane, she awoke on the morning of August 26, 1993, around 7 a.m., and got up to set the table for breakfast. She decided to lie down and rest for a bit longer. At some point, she heard the front door to the house open and assumed it was her father going out to pick up the newspaper. She fell back asleep. She did not wake up again until 11 a.m. Her father was not in the house. Mary Jane called the police and alerted her neighbors, who helped search for Ed. An extensive search of the 12-acre property failed to locate him. Dogs tracked his scent to the end of his driveway, but it ended abruptly there. Ed was in poor health, and all of his medications were left at his house. His doctors estimated that he could only survive for about 10 days without his heart medication. Nearly 8 months later, Ed's wallet, with none of its contents missing, turned up in a mailbox in the nearby city of Allentown, but Ed himself remained missing. Given the rising tensions in their relationship and the fact that she had been in the home when Ed went missing from it, Mary Jane was considered a person of interest in the case. Police were suspicious of Mary Jane's claim that her father must have wandered off, in part because of the improbability of that, given his poor physical condition and Mary Jane's own attempts to support the idea. She claimed her father had recently wandered off, and it had taken her an hour and a half to find him. When asked why she hadn't called the police on that occasion, She said it was because she found him. However, she claimed to have called the police as soon as she noticed he was missing on August 26th. The lead investigator on the case noticed a stack of items that appeared to have been ones that would be kept in the trunk of a car. She then asked to see the trunk of Mary Jane's car and found that it was completely empty, beating her to fear that Ed's body had been transported in it. She also saw a bucket of pink-tinged water inside the house but did not order testing on it, which she later regretted. Despite suspicions from the authorities and rumors running wild through the community, Mary Jane was never charged in connection with her father's disappearance and he remained missing. Mary Jane was generally considered to be nice enough but a bit eccentric. She would eventually be described by one of her attorneys as the aunt nobody wants to sit next to at Thanksgiving. She was prone to rambling and oversharing and did not seem to know when to stop talking. While she could be somewhat overwhelming to interact with, most people who knew her viewed her as harmless. Pastor Shreves had mentioned her to Belize because her behavior towards him had become concerning. Mary Jane had a fondness for painting, so he had asked her to use her creative skills to decorate the bulletin boards at the church. She ultimately did a poor job with them, but Pastor Shreves would give her other small tasks around the church now and then because she seemed to enjoy having special assignments at the church. Pastor Shreves would speak to Mary Jane when he saw her at the church but generally tried to avoid her, as once she started speaking, she generally did not stop. One day in the fall of 2006, Mary Jane came into his office and began an hour-long talk about her life story. Pastor Shreves assumed she just needed to feel like someone would listen to her and felt it was his pastoral duty to be that person at that moment. However, then, seemingly out of nowhere, Mary Jane said to Pastor Shreves, "You can't deny what's going on between us." The pastor was shocked and told her no, that nothing like that was happening. Mary Jane started back up with her story, but the shaken pastor asked her to stop. She got up and left the office, and he notified his bishop of what had happened. Mary Jane had started leaving long, rambling messages on his answering machine up to 15 times a week. The pastor eventually had to block her number in the winter of 2007. She then began calling from her cell phone. The pastor played some of these messages for the church council, who did not want to get involved in the matter and seemed to view Mary Jane's obsession as innocuous. In the summer of 2007, Mary Jane then began entering the pastor's home when he was not there to put food in his refrigerator and freezer. In response, he told Mary Jane to stop and began locking his door. She would then simply leave the food outside on the front porch. To drive home the point that he did not want her to do this, he refused to take the food inside and let it rot in the bag on the porch. This resulted in angry messages from Mary Jane from her cell phone about how ungrateful he was about someone trying to take care of him. After one particularly late-night call from Mary Jane, Pastor Shreves snapped, telling her again to stop calling him and that he could no longer be her pastor. He says her tone then changed dramatically from her usual tone to something that sounded evil as she berated him, saying that none of this behavior necessarily tied Mary Jane to Rhonda's murder, but several details that came up about Mary Jane during the investigation were of interest to police. A search of state records showed that Mary Jane had purchased a .38 caliber Rossi revolver in December of 1994. A ballistics expert working for the state had examined the bullet found in the church and the bullet that had lodged in Rhonda Smith's brain and found that they were .38 or 3.57 caliber and that they could have been fired from several different makes of revolvers, including Rossi. Mary Jane had purchased the weapon the same day she had an unemployment hearing. She had applied for unemployment after being fired from a Denny's restaurant for threatening to kill one of her co-workers several times. The co-worker had to appear at the hearing. Mary Jane's request for unemployment was denied. She did not attempt to bring the weapon she bought earlier that day into the courtroom. And the co-worker was not harmed. Phone records also showed 3 phone calls made from Mary Jane's house to the church on January 21st, 2 days before the murder. They were made at 11:07, 11:10, and 11:25, all times when Rhonda was working at the church. The first call had lasted just 6 seconds, but the second was over 4 minutes long and the third was 2.5 minutes long. This meant that Mary Jane was one of the few people who knew that Rhonda was working at the church for a few days. Authorities first spoke to Mary Jane when they attended a choir practice in order to speak with Rhonda's fellow choir members. She volunteered an explanation for the phone calls without prompting. She said she had called about getting a new church directory and had been surprised when Rhonda picked up the phone. Rhonda tried unsuccessfully to find one for her and took a message. Mary Jane also told them about her whereabouts on the day of the murder. She said she left home at 5 minutes until 11 and then went to the Holiday Hair Salon for an appointment before doing some shopping at the Joann Fabric store in the same shopping center. Mary Jane's mention of leaving home at 5 minutes to 11 caught the attention of investigators because that was almost the exact time of Rhonda's murder. Her internet activity at the church had ended abruptly at 10:54. Mary Jane told police that her brother had been home at the time and could confirm when she left the house. Despite the fact that he kept meticulous written accounts of his days, her brother could not in fact tell police the exact time his sister had left the house that day. Authorities visited the hair salon and found that Mary Jane had signed in there at 11:22 on the day of the murder. They drove the various routes from the church to the hair salon and found that Mary Jane had enough time to shoot Rhonda at 10:54 and arrive at Holiday Hair in time to sign in at 11:22. Mary Jane had a habit of wearing wigs. At her hair appointment on January 23rd, she had her stylist remove her wig and wash her real hair. The stylist informed police that Mary Jane had left the wig behind. They believed that if Mary Jane had just fired a gun prior to driving to the salon, there may have been gunpowder residue present on the wig. They obtained a search warrant and collected the wig. Testing of the wig showed the presence of only 2 out of the 3 chemicals needed to definitively show the presence of gunpowder residue on it, making the results inconclusive. Police had also asked Mary Jane about her revolver. She told them that she had only fired it once while she was on her property shortly after her father went missing. She said she didn't like the loud noise it made. This did not line up with the actual time frame of repurchasing the revolver. Mary Jane claimed she had gotten rid of the gun in December of 1994. Mary Jane said she had the gun under the seat of her car when she went to her unemployment hearing and was afraid police would search her car and think she was planning on hurting her former coworker. She therefore threw the gun out of her car. She initially said she threw it out along the road or in the woods, but when the investigator asked her if she was concerned that a child may find it out in the open like that, she changed her story, saying that she had thrown it from her car into the deep end of nearby Lake Nakamixon. Mary Jane came into the state police barracks to speak with investigators in a more formal setting on February 25th. During this interview, Mary Jane provided details that supported investigators' growing theory that Mary Jane had been jealous of Rhonda Smith for reasons both real and imagined. One of the sources of her jealousy was based in reality. Rhonda had received financial assistance from several members of the church. She had been struggling financially at the end of 2007, and Pastor Shreves had contacted a network of some of the more financially stable members of the congregation who sometimes donated money to other members of the church when needed. With their donations, Rhonda was able to stay current on her rent and her bills. 3 days before she was killed, Rhonda had spoken at the Sunday service. In her emotional speech, she thanked her community for the anonymous financial assistance as well as for all of their prayers for her. Mary Jane spoke to several people about the revelation that Rhonda had received money from members of the church. She discussed it with enough people that she displayed a variety of attitudes towards the donation: surprise, curiosity, resentment, anger. Mary Jane told investigators that she was only hurt about Rhonda receiving financial assistance because no one had asked her to contribute. The other apparent sources of Mary Jane's jealousy were based on assumptions rather than facts. During this interview, she confirmed that she had a romantic interest in Pastor Shreves. She told investigators that she had very warm and sexual feelings about him. She also said she thought the pastor could have been in love with Rhonda. She thought his reputation was in danger because, according to her, lots of other people in the church also believed the two were romantically involved. Pastor Shreves was not, in fact, in love with Rhonda, and he was not having any sort of affair with her. Despite Mary Jane's perception that he gave preferential treatment to Rhonda, he did not even really know her all that well. He estimated that he had counseled Rhonda half a dozen times, and he was aware of her mental health problems and the financial strain they put on her. These were his only motivations for offering her 3 half-days of work while he was away at his conference and for asking members of the church if they could donate money for her. Mary Jane also told investigators she felt as though there was a clique at church that included Rhonda but excluded her. Mary Jane and Rhonda were both members of the choir, but Mary Jane had told several people she would not be going to choir practice anymore shortly before Rhonda's murder. After the murder, she was at rehearsals after never actually missing any. Mary Jane told investigators that a week before Rhonda was killed, she saw that several cars were left in the church parking lot well after choir practice was over. She also knew that Rhonda's birthday was the following day. She assumed that some of the women in the choir had thrown Rhonda a birthday party and had not included her in the festivities. The whole world's going around this lady, and I don't know it, Mary Jane told investigators. No such party had taken place. While investigators were learning that Mary Jane may have had reasons for wanting Rhonda dead, however misguided they were, they did not have enough physical evidence to conclusively say that Mary Jane was Rhonda's killer. They searched Lake Nakamixon twice to see if they could find the gun Mary Jane claimed to have thrown in it over a decade earlier but could not locate it. They were able to use the February 25th interview and the possible motives it revealed to successfully apply for a search warrant for Mary Jane's car. They hoped that if Mary Jane had been the person who shot Rhonda, there would still be trace amounts of gunpowder residue in the car. On March 26th, police arrived to serve Mary Jane with a search warrant and to tow away her vehicle. This again brought out her more aggressive persona, and she ranted to state troopers until her brother came outside telling her to shut up and they were calling a lawyer. It would take several weeks for the testing on the swabs taken from various locations within Mary Jane's car to be completed. When the results came in, they showed the presence of gunpowder residue on the turn signal handle, the driver's seat, and the driver's side door of Mary Jane's car. The strongest way of connecting Mary Jane to Rhonda's murder would be to locate her revolver and test it to see if it was the weapon used to kill Rhonda. 2 searches of the leg did not locate the gun, which could have confirmed Mary Jane's story about throwing it into the lake from the bridge in late 1994. But given how deep the lake was in certain areas, finding the gun was not necessarily guaranteed, even if it was there. The weapon ultimately would be found at Lake Nakamixon, but under circumstances that pointed to Mary Jane's guilt rather than her innocence. On March 29th, Doug Silsbury, a 40-year-old contractor from Quakertown, Pennsylvania, was spending the day fishing at Nakamixon State Park with his 8-year-old son, Garrett. It was the first day of trout season, and the father and son were fishing at the lake to avoid crowds at nearby creeks. A late rain was falling, so they fished from the rocky ground underneath the Haycock Run Bridge for cover. Garrett eventually grew tired of fishing and began walking along the shore. He noticed a heron wading in the water and told his father he was going to walk down the lakeshore to get a better look at it. Doug would later say he would never forget the moment when Garrett came back to him that day, holding a gun in his hand and the fear he immediately felt for his son's safety. Doug owned firearms and therefore had stressed the importance of gun safety to his children. Garrett knew not to pick up guns, but when he first saw this gun, it looked blue because of the shallow, foamy water it was underneath. He assumed it was a toy gun and it would be safe to pick up. It wasn't until he picked it up and felt the weight of it that he realized that it was made of metal and not plastic like he thought, and that it was black instead of blue. He loosened his grip on the barrel and held the gun away from himself before taking it back to his father. After taking the gun from Garrett, Doug was horrified to see that there were 2 live hollow point shells along with 3 spent casings inside the gun. He threw the shells and the casings into the lake as Garrett walked him back to where he found the gun because wet ammunition could be unstable and therefore dangerous. Doug initially assumed that the gun had been dropped by a hunter as the lake was surrounded by state game land, but when he brought the gun home, his wife instinctively was immediately interested in the report of a Rossi 38, the same type of gun owned by Mary Jane Fonder, being found in Lake Nakamixon, near the Haycock Run Bridge, where Mary Jane had claimed to have thrown the weapon years earlier. He had Doug read in the serial number from the revolver. The serial number was a match to the serial number of the gun purchased by Mary Jane Fonder in 1994. Investigators went to Doug's home to collect the revolver. They then took him back to the lake so he could show them where it had been found. As they searched the area, they found the spent casings and live rounds Doug had thrown into the water. They also found a mostly full box of 38 special, high-velocity hollow point rounds, the kind of ammunition used by Mary Jane's gun, further out in the lake. The most damning evidence against Mary Jane came when her gun and the spent casings from it were tested by a state ballistics expert and compared to the bullets used in the murder. Analysis revealed that Mary Jane Fonder's gun was the weapon used to kill Rhonda Smith. Mary Jane Fonder was arrested on April 1, 2008 and charged with Rhonda's murder. She was taken into custody as she left a meeting of the seniors group at the church where Rhonda had been killed. During the meeting, she had sat next to Dorothy Smith, Rhonda's mother. While they had identified a motive and located physical evidence strong enough to charge Mary Jane with the murder, authorities would locate even more evidence after the arrest was made, which would later help them provide an account of Mary Jane's actions after the murder. While the location where the gun was found would seem to support Mary Jane's story about her disposing of it in 1994, the condition of the gun when it was found contradicted it. The gun had barely any rust on it and no moss or other plant growth on it. Experts would later estimate that the gun had been underwater for less than 2 months, not the more than 13 years Mary Jane had reported. Police would soon discover evidence from an unexpected source that would show that the gun most likely went into the water just a day before it was found. Ed Fonder IV was supportive of his sister and did not seem to like the police investigating her very much. But that did not stop him from going in to see them on April 9th when he found 2 small pieces of metal, which appeared to be bullet fragments, in his car. He had noticed the 2 small pieces of metal when they caught the light from the sun. Ed kept detailed notebooks of his daily activities, and many of these books had been taken into evidence. These notebooks revealed that Mary Jane had borrowed his car twice after her own vehicle was taken by authorities. She had driven his car to church on April 1st, the day she was arrested, and on March 28th, 2 days after she was served with a search warrant on her car. Investigators believe that once they took her car, Mary Jane realized that she was being seriously considered as a suspect and that police would return with a warrant to search her house, which meant she needed to get rid of her gun. Her brother Ed recorded the mileage on his car before and after Mary Jane borrowed it on March 28th. According to his records, Mary Jane had put more than enough miles on his car to have driven it to the bridge over the lake and back. Police believe Mary Jane did not stop and get out of the vehicle to throw the gun and box of ammunition, as she presumably would have thrown them at the deepest point of the lake if she could choose where they would go into the water. They believe she instead drove back and forth over the bridge until there were no other cars around to witness her throwing the items from her car. She may have believed that if she stopped, she potentially would be seen by any cars that came along after she pulled over. She misjudged her timing when throwing the items, so Mary Jane maintained her innocence even after her arrest. In spite of the Mary Jane maintained her innocence even after her arrest, in spite of the physical evidence against her. She had no explanation to offer neighbors and church members who visited her in jail as to how her gun could have been used to kill Rhonda without her knowledge. She stuck to her story about throwing the gun in the lake in 1994 and theorized that someone must have found the gun back then and returned it to the lake after using it to kill Rhonda. Mary Jane's trial began in late October of 2008. Her attorneys tried arguing Mary Jane's theory that someone had found her gun in 1994, that Doug Silsbury had tampered with the gun to make it look like he had found it in pristine condition, and that Mary Jane's brother Ed was the actual killer, among other far-fetched theories. The jury did not accept these ideas and were apparently more swayed by the evidence presented about Mary Jane's irrational jealousy of Rhonda over scenarios she herself had imagined and the findings of forensic analysis of her gun and the gunpowder found in her car. On October 30th, 2008, they found Mary Jane guilty of first-degree murder in possession of an instrument of crime. On December 5th, she received the requisite sentence for the first-degree murder conviction, life in prison without the possibility of parole. Mary Jane still did not admit to killing Rhonda. At her sentencing hearing, she described herself as the second member of her church to be murdered, and she was now being murdered by the system. Mary Jane seemed to enjoy her time at Muncie State Correctional Institution, finding a captive audience to listen to her and a sense of community with her fellow inmates. Her new therapist put her on a new course of medication and she lost 50 pounds in her first year of incarceration. She appeared to thrive under the structure prison provided her. "I feel like this is my destiny, like God wanted me to be here," she said in January of 2010. Mary Jane never fully took responsibility for the murder. She did eventually acknowledge that she must have been the person who killed Rhonda but never fully confessed. In 2010, She told the Bucks County Courier-Times she had recently seen a picture of Rhonda in a newspaper and realized what had happened. In the days before Rhonda was killed, she had been experiencing periods of time she could not remember. She remembered going to the church that day, but then experienced another blackout and did not remember shooting Rhonda. Based on the evidence against her, she acknowledged that she must have been the person who killed Rhonda. Even though she now acknowledged this one reality, she still held on to one of the fabricated circumstances that led to her killing Rhonda. She still maintained that she, Rhonda, and Pastor Shreves were involved in a love triangle. While she claimed she was never jealous of Rhonda, she also claimed that the pastor was interested in a romantic relationship with her and would become flirtatious with her. She believed he would always look for her when he came into a room. She took this to be a sign of his romantic interest in her. Rhonda's family did not find comfort in Mary Jane's partial acknowledgement that she had taken their daughter from them. It doesn't make us any happier. We gained nothing. We lost a daughter. Nothing changes my feelings right now. We're going to go through this the rest of our lives. No matter what happens, that's not going to bring Rhonda through this door, Jim Smith, Rhonda's father, said in response to Mary Jane's statements. He and his wife continued visiting their daughter's grave daily. In 2018, the family home where Mary Jane and her brother had been living at the time of the murder and the 12 acres of property surrounding it was sold to their neighbor, John Brunner. John had helped in the initial search for the elder Ed Fonder when he went missing in 1993 and had always believed Mary Jane was lying about her father's disappearance. He was therefore very cooperative when authorities asked to search the property as part of a renewed investigation into the disappearance after they learned the land was sold. Mary Jane and her brother Ed had not been willing to allow such a search. On May 22, 2018, ground-penetrating radar was brought in to aid the search of the property. Nothing was found. Mary Jane Fonder died as a result of cardiac arrest in the prison infirmary less than 2 weeks after the search on June 4, 2018. She was 5 years old. Bucks County District Attorney Matt Weintraub said in a statement that the search for Edward Fonder III would continue despite the death of Mary Jane, who he described as the only suspect in his presumed demise. Rhonda's father, Jim, passed away in 2012 at the age of 77. He is buried alongside his daughter in a cemetery in Hellertown, Pennsylvania. Thank you for joining us on this journey into the depths of unsolved mysteries. Cold cases not only challenge our understanding of the past, but also ignite our curiosity and determination for answers. Remember to subscribe to stay updated on our latest investigations. And if you have any information regarding the cases we've covered, don't hesitate to reach out. Together, we can shed light on the shadows of the past and bring closure to those who seek it. Until next time, stay vigilant, stay curious, and never stop seeking the truth.